All right, we have a really healthy and fantastic turnout now. So without further ado, I shall begin. Good day if you're in the Western Hemisphere, or good evening if you're in Asia, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Darius Liu. I'm the co-founder and chief operating officer of iStocks. Very warm welcome from the iStocks family to you. And thank you for dialing into tonight's webinar entitled The Age of Digital Securities Introduction and the Developments. Now, I'm personally very, very honored and super excited about today's webinar, and I'm sure everyone here will find tonight's presentation and Q&A both fascinating and thought-provoking. Now, before I introduce tonight's speakers, a little housekeeping. Now, if you'd like to ask any questions, simply click on the Q&A button that's represented by the two speech bubbles at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Now, if you don't see this Q&A button, just move your mouse cursor to the bottom of the screen and the Q&A button will display. I will then pose your questions during the Q&A segment to the speakers after our presentation. Now, if you have any questions or clarifications, please don't hesitate to reach out to me or any of the speakers. Our contact details will be shared right after tonight's webinar. Now, it gives me great pleasure to turn the time over to our esteemed speakers for tonight. Pavel is my love from TMF, and Stefan Meyer from MME. I would like to invite our speakers to introduce themselves briefly, starting with Pavel, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very excited about taking part in this webinar. Just a few words of my background. So I am director at TMF, and I had the capital markets practice for the region of Austria, Germany, Switzerland, and also Cyprus and Malta. So I'm responsible for the kind of key operations and strategic decisions in that field and the services that we render, which is why I'll be able to share some of the insights from that perspective, how we fit into the what we do in that field and how we fit into the digital ecosystem. I'm maybe just a word. So I'm a lawyer by background, and I spent practicing tax law before TMF. Just a word on TMF as well. So at TMF, as you see here, it's one of the big players on the market in terms of trust services. I think we're the largest, certainly, with the largest global footprint, covering over 90 countries, almost 8,000 people across the world. I think we have around 125 offices globally. And we have a very long track record in the capital markets arena. We have the largest portfolio of structured products in Europe. We also have a very long history in the US in terms of structured finance. And as you see here, so our main client base is Fortune, is global, international, multinational companies with Global 500 and FTSE 100 being our main customers. In this field.
So, thank you. I hand over. It's a pleasure being here. My name is Stefan Meyer. I'm an attorney at law with MME. MME, as you might know, is a Swiss-based law firm with a strong DLT focus. We started our DLT practice in 2014 by structuring the Ethereum Foundation and also the ICO. And then during the last years, we had the pleasure to be able to support a whole range of different DLT projects, from fully distributed protocols to also very, very centralized models. And in the meanwhile, around 30 of our 90 lawyers are purely focused on blockchain and DLT projects. Personally, I'm also involved in DLT projects for a while. I'm specialized in tokenization projects, also did a PhD in this field. I co-founded a European-based company focusing on digitization of negotiable instruments, and I'm a lecturer at 3 universities on the interface between law, especially DLT law and technology. And I'm happy to be here and also to provide some inputs on the legal aspects of security tokens.
Thanks, Pavel. Thanks, Stefan. As for myself, my name is Darius Liu, co-founder and COO of iStocks. Now, iStocks is the world's first regulated issuance, custody, and trading platform for digitized securities. Now, we're based in Singapore, regulated by the Singapore regulator, the MES. We are very, very proud to be able to bring our investors interesting and exciting investment opportunities to help investors like you and I build better portfolios and, make more money. So do check out iStocks platform, www.istocks.com. Sign up for an account to view our very, very interesting ongoing and past issuances. Now, without further ado, I shall dive straight into tonight's presentation entitled The Age of Digital Securities, Introduction and Developments. Before we go into the industry landscape, let's take a step back and ask the very, very fundamental question. What are digital securities? Now, securities, as you know, are regulated instruments, and in Singapore, they're regulated under the Securities and Futures Act. Digital securities are securities that take the form of tokens, smart contracts that are deployed on a blockchain. Being in a digital form rather than in the traditional form in terms of scripts and so on, they offer very key benefits over more traditional forms, including things like instant settlement, practically cost-free custody, and so on. And the important thing to realize, appreciate here, and I'd like to emphasize this again, is that digital securities are recognized as securities under Singapore law, which means that any platform that deals, trades, or custodizes these digital securities must be regulated, and that forms the basis of the trust element of our platform. Now, traditional versus digital securities, what are the benefits? Right, so on the left, I have listed down a few key attributes. Some of us may be familiar with these, especially those of us who are active in the private markets. In terms of accessibility, in terms of fees, in terms of lockups, if we enter into, for example, a private fund or private equity, we'll all be familiar with lengthy lockups, non-transparent fees, accessibility that are only open to all but the high net worth, ultra high net worth through the private banks and so on. Whereas in the digital world, all that changes, right? The whole conversation changes because platforms like us, our mission, we exist to allow greater accessibility to all accredited investors, not just ultra high net worth and institutional. We offer a very transparent fee structure, instant settlement because of the fact that everything's digital, cost-free custody, automated distribution of smart contracts, and so on. So a lot of benefits derive from the fact that these securities are in the digital format. This is the way of the future, we believe. Now, who benefits, right? We have in traditional capital markets, we have the issuers and the investors, right? So the users of capital as well as the sources of capital. Now, for the issuers, they are in the market to raise capital. And through the digital securities format, they are able to raise capital more quickly, more efficiently, in smaller bite sizes from pools of unmet need, right? We have automated a lot of onboarding flows like KYC, and this lowers down operational costs for everybody. Now, for investors, right, like yourself, like me, we want greater access. We want greater diversification for portfolios. We want to make more money. And the way to do this is to gain access to alternative, exclusive investment opportunities that we couldn't otherwise get to in lower minimum ticket sizes, access to secondary market liquidity, lower fees, higher transparency. That sounds really good. And that's what digital securities can bring to you. Now, if you take a look at the market structure, you have issuers on the left, investors on the right. And in between, there's this complex web of intermediaries that have been sort of built up over the last many, many years. And this forms the structure of the capital markets in the private space. Now, these intermediaries serve that intermediation role. That's why they call intermediaries. But the way that the private capital markets are set up, it results in low transparency on performance, on fees. They're very, very fragmented. And you hardly have any secondary market liquidity at all. So there's very, very unequal access from both the issuer side as well as the investment side. And we feel it, right? For those of us who are outside the high net worth circles today, we don't really get that much access to the really exciting stuff. But how can we change that? We can change that by introducing, using technology to form a platform that bridges the issuers and the investors more directly. And this is what iStocks is all about, right? And this is the power of digitalization. This is the power of digital securities. We directly connect issuers on the left, as you see here, to people who are looking for good opportunities on the right, both investors like you and me, as well as institutional end clients, as well as B2B2C players. And this is really the crux of the thing. So you see the current status quo. You have the investors and you have the issuers, and between them, banks, brokers, custodian banks, exchanges, registrars, and all these web of intermediaries can all be replaced through the use of technology and smart contracts by one single layer. It results in integrated solution, lower fees, higher transparency, and better access, right? All that taken together just means that you have more opportunities to build a better portfolio and make more money for yourself. So that is, in a nutshell, what I would like to introduce to you in the form of digital securities. Now, I like to hand the time over now to Pavel. I can, as a platform, introduce to you what we do, but it's really brings me great pleasure to hear from just about the biggest game in town when it comes to trust services and administration, TMF. So Pavel, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. That's really, really insightful. And I will build on that. The purpose also for me to join and bring the message across is that to show that the traditional infrastructure that we have for the capital markets already exists and can be very easily transposed to the digital ecosystem, thanks to iStocks, for example, and the like. To do that, I'll say just a few words maybe about TMF in terms of services, how we provide that infrastructure. And then I will explain a little bit how TMF fits into the digital ecosystem with our services, how we transpose that. And for that purpose, I'll explain two examples, which I think will be able to show you a little bit how we are able to fit into the, I would say, the model that was just presented by iStocks Darius with the digital issuances, right? So as I mentioned, the TMF is the biggest trust and administration services firm globally. This is just some of the, give you the feeling of some of the clients that we service, also the size and the scope that we have. Earlier, you also saw the footprint. We cover basically all the countries, all jurisdictions. This is, I think, really quite unique to TMF because we're typically global and like the global technology that iStocks is offering as well. So from that perspective, we fit very well into the digital system, the digital world, which allows transactions to happen cross-border without limitations. So one of the reasons that we fit so well with iStocks is because we are able to globalize their offering very, very easily, be it on the investor side or on the issuer side, right? So things that TMF typically does, I think, so we're just jumping one slide, but is where we typically do a lot of securitizations. In the securitizations, we have a lot of, it covers different asset classes. We typically offer the administration of the issuer SPVs, so the structure that issues notes on the capital markets for investors. We administer the full process of the issuance. So with the traditional issuance, for example, listing on the stock exchanges in Zurich, in London, across Europe and the US as well. We also, in the traditional structured finance, we provide all the regulatory services related to those issuances. I'm talking about, obviously, the basis for accounting, administration, governance services, but also more specific to the investments and the assets that are being, for example, issued and securitized, like the reporting on the underlying assets, reporting for the NAV calculations, fund reporting, administration of the KYC, and also the investors. And I jump to show two examples, for example, where we can see how this actually fits together with the projects that are being listed and issued on iStocks in the digital environment. If we can just go back to the fund slide again, Darius, thank you very much.
Fun? Okay.
So that's fine, thank you. So I know I'm conscious of time, so no worries. So here you see what it looks a typical, a classic traditional fund structure with the underlying assets, for example, real estate in this case, with different SPVs that are holding these assets, all the way up to the master holdco and the fund. So TMF covers the full chain from the investment, from the target investment to the mid holding companies, all the way up to the fund structure. Typically, we do all the reporting, we do also all the governance, the setups, and the management, and also the wind up of the structure once after the exit. What's I think unique here in this field, I think is and very particular, for example, where also this structure can be applied first of all to digital assets as well. So, for example, we work with some of the funds some of the index funds that use digital assets as the underlying portfolio, and typically we produce the NAV reports, for example, a so-called a portfolio composition file where we basically calculate the value of the underlying assets. We produce that maybe on a daily basis, on a weekly basis as required for the investments, and we publish that. And typically the funds on the fund level, we will do, for example, the reporting to the investors, while the investors will be actually onboarded and traded through the digital issuance that, for example, could be on iStocks, right? So from that perspective, it's just shows how the traditional services that we manage all the way up to the fund level could be transposed. The infrastructure is there, and it could be transposed to the iStocks and the digital environment. And just the second example that I mentioned with the aviation, it shows a typical operating lease structure for a portfolio that actually has planes, so plane assets as a portfolio that is being financed through a debt issuance. This is a traditional setup where we typically do the operating lease payments, we manage the cash, we also do the governance of the SPVs. We also hold the security on the underlying assets, like in this case, a security, shown as a security trustee. And then these planes are being leased out to international airlines, like shown here with Swiss. So in this case, again, as you see, the infrastructure is already there. And I think with iStocks, what we're able to do is we're able to place this infrastructure onto an issuance via iStocks. And so the way this kind of structures could be funded is through a digital issuance on the stocks and then traded. One of the points I think to mention is that these kind of investments are actually very liquid, as you can see. And I think iStocks allows actually to increase the liquidity by opening up this type of structures, this type of investments to the public of investors, to also not just specialized funds, but also ordinary people. So with that, I think I can finish and then pass over to Stefan.
Thank you, Pavel. So now you learned what security tokens are, what the advantages are, also where security tokens can be used. And in the next couple of minutes, I'll try to provide you also some insights and information in regard to the legal basics of security tokens. And Darius, if you can move one slide further, thank you. So security tokens in general depend or vary strongly based on the jurisdiction. So I tried to make some explanations more conceptually and around what I call a security token life cycle. So from a lawyer's perspective, a security token usually has two main legal goals, two obvious goals. So first of all, the token holder should be the direct beneficiary. It's one goal. And secondly, if you transfer the token, it should lead to a direct transfer of the claim, membership right, title, whatever is attached to the token. In addition, Thank you. There are also usual side goals. As Darius presented on his slide, in the classical world, you have a lot of different intermediaries. It's fragmented. So it should also lead to a reduced need of intermediaries, make it more efficient, more transparent. And of course, it should be a purely digital process. On the next slide, so during the last years, we've been structuring quite a broad range of different security tokens, and something we realized from a legal and regulatory perspective is that it's very important to have a proper classification model. You are probably all aware of the distinction between payment token, security token, utility token, more or less. However, this is just one dimension, and from a legal perspective, there are also other factors which are then decisive for both the structure but also the regulatory implications. And if you please continue one slide. So here, this is one legally driven classification structure we worked out in 2016. And in essence, we distinguished three types of tokens. On the one hand, you have tokens in a purely decentralized distributed ecosystem. Here, as a token holder, you do not have a counterparty in a legal sense. The token is issued by a smart contract, and you might have some technical possibilities. You might even get profit, but not from a legal counterparty. So this is the left blue part. Then in the middle, we have several different tokens which should transfer claims, rights, memberships, equity, fund shares, etc. So here the token is the equivalent of in the old world, the paper-based certificate. So instead of using a paper as a means of transport, you're using a token. This is the middle yellow part. And then on the right side, we also have a third category, which might be less known. So what is also possible via tokens is that you do not transfer rights or claims against the counterparty, but so-called rights in rem, such as a property or a direct ownership right or IP rights. So we have, for example, a project tokenizing gold bars. And then in these projects, the token holder is really the physical owner of the gold bars. The gold bars is then stored at a certain place. And you have a direct ownership in a property law sense. And in these cases, you, of course, also have then a reduced counterparty risk and certain other advantages. So if we continue to the next slide, as you see, the heart of a security token or the core is less the regulatory implications, which are of course also important, but the legal underlying structure. And here you also have a lot of steering possibility, how you structure your security token projects, how you legally attach the right to the token. And here we see also certain jurisdictions which also already implemented specific legal instruments or legal forms for DLT-based instruments. And this has a lot of implications. You have to consider, for example, segregation in bankruptcy proceedings, also the applicability of things which have been known from the paper-based certificates. So as, for example, good faith acquisition, pledging, all those legal possibilities, which you know from the classical securities world, and which are nonetheless equally relevant also for a token-based economy. So this is my first, my phase 0 tokenization. And then after tokenization, you have the, of course, primary market distribution. And here, if you press again, yeah. Further, thank you, Darius. So here in the primary market distribution, it of course depends a lot on the regulatory environment of the jurisdiction you're targeting. So if you have a token issuance, then what you usually will do is you analyze the target jurisdictions where the investors are. You have to check whether there are license requirements, AML duties, also whether some regulatory prospectuses are needed. So to ensure that you're aligned with all regulatory requirements. And for this, it's of course very valuable if you have also strong partners as iSTOX, TMF, but also as MME. The next phase then, after the primary market issuance, you have the secondary market trading. And as you might know, there are a lot of different possibilities how and where you can trade tokens, from peer-to-peer transactions, use of distributed, decentralized exchanges, but then also trading platforms. In regard to decentralized exchanges, they are usually in this phase very experimental. Also, they have a couple of disadvantages: less user experience, also less convenient. So here, it's very important if you have if you're using a trusted party to organize the trading of your security tokens, and also a partner who is able then to be in line with all the regulatory requirements which are applicable. What we also see in regard to the trading of security or asset tokens is the evolving of new license categories in certain jurisdictions. This is just one of a couple of examples in Switzerland. So-called DRT trading facility has been introduced. This allows then multilateral trading of all types of tokens by all types of investors, and also both trading and post-trading activities, which has been historically separated. So trading was by exchanges, post-trading by CSD, SSSs. And here we see also in the future more and more possibilities to have a very convenient way of trading asset and security tokens. So this is phase 2. And then if we move forward to the final phase of our security token lifecycle, we can, of course, add a lot of different additional applications for our security tokens. Here, I mentioned dividends and voting, also in light of equity token. So if you, again, press one time the button, thank you. So what we can do here, if we think of an equity token, we have the possibility to directly, automatically distribute dividends. Could be, of course, in fiat money, but it could, of course, also be in stable coins or even in central bank digital currency. So here we have a lot of optimization potential, and not only in regard to the distribution of the dividends, but also in regard to governance and voting. So if we tokenize, for example, equity, then we also have a very convenient system to then organize, for example, digital general assemblies where then the shareholders directly can vote by using the tokens. And what we see here, also interesting, is that the law and technology come closer and closer, and we see that we have more and more possibilities to enable additional use cases. So this was a very short summary on certain legal aspects, and I'm happy to hand again over to you, Darius.
Thank you very much, Pavel and Stefan. Very, very insightful. Now, we've talked a lot about the regulatory landscape, the legal structures, you know, how these digitization of securities and assets can bring about more benefits for all users. And I will be the first to acknowledge that we are not the first to talk about this, right? I mean, people have been talking about securitization 2.0 using blockchain smart contract technology for years. But to date, no one has been able to deliver on the promise until now. So iStocks is very, very proud to be the world's first integrated issuance, custody, and trading platform for digitized securities. And we have launched multiple products, and we have had multiple very, very happy investors so far. Just a case study, and to show you that the time has arrived for digital securities. It is real. It is happening right now as we speak. Elite Partners Capital is a European logistics fund that has been tokenized and listed on iStocks. And it has done very, very well. And we have listed it in July 2020, and we have actually done a second close in December 2020. So you can see how flexible these digitized security structures can be. We have in the past done the full life cycle of a bond, from the issuance to the coupon payments to the maturity payments and the listing of the bond upon maturity, all that done through smart contracts, the distributions all done through on platform instantaneously through the smart contracts, as Stefan has pointed out earlier. So it is, sounds nice on paper, it is indeed, but it is real and it is here on iStocks. We don't obviously operate on our own. We have multiple participants involved in every issuance to make it successful. Partners and friends like TMF, like MME, law firms, fund admin, accountant, legal, and the like. All the way from the initial scoping and the legal structuring to actually processing the application to make sure that everything is accounted for and made fully transparent in the disclosure documents, all the way on to marketing, and finally the actual listing of the offering on iStocks. And once that subscription phase is over, trading on the secondary market begins, which of course brings about the solution to the lengthy lockup periods that we see in private capital markets today. So with that, I will draw the presentation portion of tonight's webinar to a close. And again, before I dive into this Q&A, I would like to remind everybody that if you'd like to ask any questions, just click on the Q&A button that's represented by 2 speech bubbles at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you do not see it, just mouse over to the bottom of your screen and the Q&A button will display. And I will then pose the questions to Stefan or Pavel. All right. We have quite a number of questions and time is ticking, so I'll just launch straight in. First question, how will this digital platform or digitized security platforms coexist with traditional stock exchanges? Will stock exchanges eventually get converted into digital, or will the public companies start to raise funds through this digital platform? Pavel or Stefan, any comments on that before I jump in as well?
Sure, I can quickly say, so you know, we are quite big in terms of doing issuance on in the traditional way on the traditional exchanges. So you know, we're very familiar with the process. We have the infrastructure, and I think like Darius just said, this infrastructure can very easily be adapted to the digital issuances in a way companies like TMF would be, you know, fulfilling the legal requirements that Stefan was talking about to link the digital assets or the digital, you know, issuances to the real world, to the physical assets, to I would say, you know, the real life. So from that perspective, I think what Darius mentioned, I think, is that the transition will be to the digital world for all the reasons, for all the benefits that this offers. And the current players like TMF are able to use that technology or apply that technology to link that to, I would say, traditional structures and traditional structured finance, you know, requirements that we see for the traditional exchanges.
Yeah, and to briefly add in this regard, fully agree with the statement. I also like the question. It's a good one. What we see is that on the one hand, certain big stock exchanges are now intensively investing in creating also crypto-based trading facilities. However, of course, they are usually less flexible. They also have difficulties to adapt to the new technologies. They're also in their existing regulatory environment, and therefore we see a lot of room and potential also for new players as also iStocks is. So here I think that the new digital players will become more and more important. And also in addition, if the new players then can benefit of dedicated legal institutions or legal provisions in regard to DLT trading, as the one I mentioned in Switzerland, then you of course have a lot of freedom and flexibility to provide solutions. And this makes you then very powerful and also potentially a kind of a threat for the existing exchange environment.
And maybe worth mentioning also, just to confirming that trend to digitalization, the Swiss Stock Exchange has already founded a digital Swiss Stock Exchange, SDX, that we know the team very well, and they are also transitioning, I would say, traditional securities into that direction. I mean, they're much further away, I think, than iStocks for the reasons that Stefan mentioned. But I think it confirms the trend that a lot of countries are now moving into the trend, into that trend as well, and the traditional exchanges are moving to the digital world.
Thanks. Maybe I could just sort of address this question from a slightly different perspective. Now, in my presentation, I say and use a lot of terms, but there's actually one word that you'll hardly ever hear me say, and that's the word disrupt. iStocks is not here to disrupt traditional capital markets, right? We exist to meet an unmet need. And that's the only way that new players like us using new technology will survive and thrive, and by meeting unmet needs. And we see that unmet need in the market today, right? The private capital markets are basically closed off to everybody outside the super high net worth. So that is the unmet need. Traditional stock exchanges serve a certain need, and they're doing it pretty well. But there is an unmet need, and there's a segment of the market that traditional players are just not servicing. And that's where we step in. So we can coexist in that space because we are attacking different segments of the market, but taken together, the traditional stock exchanges and market intermediaries and the public markets and players like us in digitized security space in the private markets, when taken together, it benefits the investments as a whole. So I think that's how I would see the structure of the market going forward. So on that note, let me look to the next question. Maybe this one for Stefan. How are regulators viewing digital securities in the next maybe 1 or 2 years?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So what we've seen in the early beginning of security tokens is that most regulators handled them more or less as also other kind of securities which are not DLT based. Now, the more security tokens exist, the more the regulators also consider adapting legislation. We've seen this in Europe, for example, in Germany. There is now specific regulatory type of financial instrument which is DLT based. So the regulators are now thinking of whether the existing framework is sufficient. I think also from a regulator's perspective, those kinds of types of financial instrument securities have a lot of potential. I think the fact that most jurisdictions also provide specific legal instruments to issue the instruments, to trade them, shows that it's definitely a growing, a growing kind of the type of the economy. So I'm convinced that from a regulator's perspective, it's less a threat, but also a possibility. And now, of course, we also have kind of competition between the different currencies to provide the best legal framework then to issue and trade the instruments.
Thank you, Stefan. The next question revolves around, tokenization of real estate, right? So one question is, do you guys tokenize real estate, and what kind of real estate assets can be sort of tokenized or issued as digital securities? Maybe Pavel or Stefan, you want to chime in here before I add on?
I mean, we have a couple of real estate tokenization projects. They're also kind of one of the holy grails of tokenization. However, from a legal perspective and in regard to tokenization, you have the challenge that you usually need an entry in the land register, which is then, of course, the hurdle to have a direct model. And then we have a couple of indirect tokenization models where you use then funds or certain entities holding the real estate, and then you have either a claim against the entity or you are shareholder of the entity. And here we see now see a lot of different possibilities how you can structure it. And from my perspective, it's also a nice example of a token because you have a good, which is very difficult to trade. And also if you can fragment it and then invest partly in real estate, I think this is a very, very nice use case where all the advantages of a token really matter in a powerful way.
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, yeah, my case study that I mentioned towards the end of my presentation, Elite Capital Partners, is precisely one of those examples that Stefan mentioned, right? The real estate fund, logistics assets in Europe, extremely hard to access otherwise, but with digitized securities on iStocks, you can get in for as little as a few thousand euros, and you have exposure to that very, very interesting asset class. So that's one example of the power of digitized assets that can bring more value to investors like you and me.
And if I can just add as well, I think this is also a perfect example where the digital world, you need to have like an administrative layer on the digital issuance. By that I mean some kind of register, entity name, registration, holding of the actual real estate. You also need all the contracts around maintenance, around transfer rights, around securities on that asset as well. And I think this is where you see how you need the administrative infrastructure, which is already available, for example with TMF, to fit with the digital issuance provided by iStocks. So it's a perfect example of that.
Yep, and this nicely segues into another question that's been asked, where apart from logistics, can hospitality, commercial, healthcare, real estate assets be tokenized? Absolutely, right? The same sort of logic applies, and everything that Pavel and Stefan mentioned equally applies to different use cases in the real estate world, and actually to real assets as a whole. We do have some iStocks related questions, so if you bear with me, I shall attack those. Can individuals make investments on iStocks? Absolutely. We are set up, of course, to bring more access to individual investors like yourself and I. And how do I sign up on iStocks? Simply go to iStocks.com, look on the top right-hand corner and click sign up, and follow a few simple steps, and you'll be on your way. Can anyone join? Currently, we're open to accredited and institutional investors. Accredited investors by the Singapore definition, and I shall read it out here for the benefit of everyone. An individual whose income in the last year is 300,000 Singapore dollars, or its equivalent in foreign currency, or whose net financial assets exceed 1 million Singapore dollars in value, or net personal assets exceed $2 million, including your primary residence. So for more information, it's all on iStocks.com. Simply click on sign up and you'll be on your way. All right. Something changing a little bit tack here. Are digital securities considered crypto? It's a very common question. Maybe Stefan can take that one.
I mean, here, of course, it depends on the definition of crypto, and also if we take it from a regulatory perspective, we have different definitions. Currently, it's not a cryptocurrency, a digital security. So here we have quite a clear distinction. So on the one hand, cryptocurrency usually is decentralized, usually also do not have a specific issuer. On the other hand, a digital security, here you have a legal counterparty, usually you have a contractual structure. So that's really a different instrument.
Excellent. Pavel, maybe this one is right up your alley. Can you describe the costs for digital securities issuance versus, say, a traditional IPO?
Wow. Maybe we can take this one offline.
Yeah.
I think the answer is really, it depends. I don't think there's a set pricing. I think it depends also on what kind of issuances and IPOs we are talking about. I think, if we're talking about things like, Uber, or maybe the Ant Group, then we're talking something about very large, very complex, and obviously the fees will be much, much higher. But I think what the advantage is with the digital issuances, like Darius mentioned, there's a whole segment, I would say the lower segment of the investor market, which is not covered. So for the smaller issuances, because it's simply too expensive to go to a traditional through traditional structure issuance on a normal stock exchange, I would say. There's a whole segment of investors that are being left out. And I think with the technology that iStocks is offering, we can have a very, very competitive solution, standardized solution, and we're actually working on that as well. Having an issuance platform, so the administrative side, that will be able then to fit perfectly with iStocks. You'd have a full, template standardized version of a security that's being placed. And obviously that will have a very competitive and very big impact on the fees, especially compared to a traditional issuance. I mean, traditionally, just to finish off, traditionally issuances under 50 million on a normal stock exchange is very, very complicated. It's for costs, for all those regulatory reasons, also legal advisors, of course. And that's, I think, that segment is, I think, completely left out. So iStocks is perfect fit for that.
Yeah, I'd just like to add that for one of the very nice draws for issuers on iStocks is the fact that they do not need to issue a prospectus. And this is because we have a prospectus exemption because we serve accredited investors and institutional investors. So as people have done IPOs before, the prospectus is this extremely thick document that costs hundreds of thousands, if not millions, to produce. And by dispensing with that, it lowers the cost of issuance and the time to market tremendously. And that sort of cost savings can then be passed on to the investors in the form of lower fees and lower carry.
But yeah, if I can add, I think you're also taking an advisor who is specifically, specialized in very familiar with the digital issuances and the whole thematic, will also save a lot of costs as well, because he has already the knowledge. He knows exactly what needs to be, in the issuance, what kind of questions need to be covered. So, taking someone who's much more specialized in this field will definitely save you a lot of costs.
Cool.
Right, Stefan? Am I correct?
Fully agree.
All right. Next question. Does a private fund traded on iStocks need to be entirely tokenized, or do you allow tokenized LP into a standard fund? And by that, I take it to mean sort of like a feeder structure or intermediary. And I think the flexibility and the beauty of digitized securities is that both are possible. As a matter of fact, Elite, going back to that example, is actually a sleeve of a broader fund. So a sleeve was carved out to be tokenized and distributed through iStocks to accredited investors. And the rest of the fund was placed out through the traditional means. And this whole fundraise was taken together and invested into very nice logistics properties in Europe. So the answer is it does not have to be entirely tokenized. It can be partially tokenized. It can be through a feeder structure. It can be through intermediaries. Although it's all about structuring, and we have actually done a variety of structures, right, Stefan?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
And as you mentioned, that's also the structure is the steering point, and here you can really optimize. And if you have a great structure, it makes your tokens so much more efficient, and also you can really also have a lot of different use cases and applications which can then be built on the top.
That's right. We have a question on central bank digital currencies. I'm sure, Stefan, you may this is something that you may have been looking at. How can the rise of central bank digital currencies support digital securities?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, that's one of the most current questions, the central bank digital currencies. I mean, what we've seen in the past, initially Bitcoin has been created as a means of payment. However, we also have seen that we have had a lot of fluctuations, and Bitcoin did not really work as a stable money. Therefore, we had then a lot of privately issued stable coins, and now the kind of third generation are the central bank issued digital currency. And from my perspective, that's definitely a huge advantage if we have those government issued digital money, because you can then have, for example, a direct automated delivery versus payments. On the one side, you have the digital security. On the other side, you have the money, and then in the middle you have a smart contract directly exchange it. And this really makes the whole application of digital securities much more interesting, in addition to all the benefits you currently have. And here, for example, Singapore, as far as I'm aware, is quite ahead. Also, they initiated project Ubin already for quite a while, and now more and more countries are also having projects. For example, Switzerland.
Excellent. Stefan, maybe to follow up on that, I'm wondering, would that impact also the traditional banking world if the central bank would be able to, direct the funds, without using the banking system, so to say?
Yes, precisely. And this is one of the discussions which we have at the moment. Should then this central bank digital currency be also available by private persons? So does it directly go from the central bank down to the individuals, or is it just something between central bank and then retail banks? So this is one of the discussions. If, of course, I, as a private person, am able to hold in my personal wallet central bank money, then this will have a huge impact on the banking. However, we will also might have some other discussions regarding privacy, etc. You then, of course, also have a lot of steering possibilities as a government. But nonetheless, I think that's a very, very important topic. Maybe as a last thought, the question is then, of course, whether this central bank digital currency will be issued on a privately controlled infrastructure, or whether it goes to a public permissionless blockchain. I assume it probably will be the former one, unless the latter.
Very good. Thank you very much. A question for both of you, and this is maybe a personal view or the view of your firm. Which types of assets or the characteristics are most suited for tokenization and that brings out the most value and the most attractiveness to the users?
Well, I mean, I can say so. We manage traditionally quite a lot of securitizations, structured finance structures. Also, for example, debt funds, loans, direct lending. I think. And perhaps this is more my personal view from experience. I think what's the most benefits would be the most illiquid investments, right? So things like private equity, things like real estate, right? So that and this is really revolutionary, where these traditionally locked in investments that are illiquid can suddenly be opened up to the public for the trading. Very easily using the technology. So I think that's where the biggest win, I think, lies, and the biggest benefits lie. And I think this is also confirms a little bit the trend that we see as well in this direction. What do you think, Stefan?
I fully agree with your statement that the more illiquid, the more interesting to tokenize. I think that's absolutely correct. As you also mentioned, equity. I think equity is a nice use case, also because the tokenization allows you to have certain other applications on the top. As I mentioned before, voting, dividends, governance. So here, I think that's a very elegant use case. Otherwise, we also already discussed real estate, can be art, but it can be also very, very classical obligations, derivatives, etc. And also the more trading facilities we have, the more asset tokens, the more also ordinary instruments will be then registered in a tokenized form. And I think that's definitely the future and the way we go to.
Great. Pavel, Stefan, both of you have, of course, experience looking at securitization and DLT all over the world. Which sort of jurisdictions do you see are the most accommodative and the most forward-looking in terms of, securitization 2.0 using smart contracts and DLT?
Well, being based in Zurich in Switzerland, I think it's it would be fair to say that I think Switzerland and also Singapore, I think, are really at the forefront in this field. And as Stefan will confirm, I think the regulatory field, Switzerland was one of the first, I think also Singapore, to adopt a clear regulatory field, to look at this asset from a regulatory perspective and to actually open it up favorably by the authorities. So I think from that perspective, it's important that the authorities also are quite familiar with the subject. So it makes it much easier. All the dialogue, all the resolving any questions about new products, etc. So from that perspective, I think that I would say is the strongest advantage, and I think these two jurisdictions are definitely at the forefront.
Yeah, if I had to name two, I would also say Singapore and Switzerland. I mean, in both jurisdictions, we already know DLT projects for quite a while. And the aspect that Pavel mentioned regarding also the knowledge and know-how of the regulator is one of the most important aspects. And both FINMA in Switzerland and MAS in Singapore have been doing a lot of work in the DLT sector. They've been checking projects a lot very thoroughly, and also the MAS sent delegations to Switzerland and vice versa, also to get more know-how. And here we now benefit a lot, and we also benefit because now in the meanwhile we had a lot of changes in law, even facilitating such DLT projects more. However, it also got tougher. So we also have now a couple of other jurisdictions which adapted law and which now try to push DLT projects. So we really now see it's not anymore a niche sector, but it's really a intensively growing business.
Cool. I'm conscious of time. We're just coming up to the top of the hour, so I'll just take one last question, which is a question for iStocks. And the question is, what other offerings does iStocks have? The fastest way to answer that question is to go to the iStocks website. Actually, we list down all our listed completed issuances. But the short answer to that is we have a wide variety of funds, very interesting ones, from global macro hedge funds to risk premier funds to more conservative kind of mandates like real estate funds and so on. And in 2021, we'll be very excited to bring you different offerings across asset classes, like bonds of different maturities, private equity, and so on. So I think the basic idea and the beauty again of digitized securities is that it's infinitely configurable, right? So there's various ways of structure it, can digitize it, offer it on the platform in a very cost-effective, streamlined manner. And to take a leaf from e-commerce, right? You go to the e-commerce website, you see all the wares, and depending on what you want on the day, you'll be able to find something that you want. And the thought process is the same. You come to a platform like iStocks, you'll be able to find, depending on your risk and return appetite, something among the various offerings that we have that suit you. And the fact that it is small bite size and very varied across asset classes, it basically means that there's something for everyone on the platform. So with that note, I would like to thank my very esteemed guests, Pavel and Stefan, for addressing all the questions and for your very insightful presentation. I'm afraid we're just all out of time, and this brings me to the end of tonight's webinar. Now, we'll be delighted to get in touch with anyone looking to find out more about digitized securities. We are at your disposal, and we'll be happy to continue this conversation offline. Here's how to get in touch with Pavel, Stefan, and myself. Please feel free to reach out. We'd be very happy to connect with you. And with that, I will wrap up tonight's webinar. On behalf of the iStocks family, on behalf of TMF and MME, I wish everyone a very, very good evening.